Welcome back to the Australia Post Business Talks webinar. I'm Julie Mathers, CEO of Snuggle Hunny, and this year I was honoured to be inducted into the top 50 people in eCommerce Hall of Fame. Joining me today are two of the top performers from this year's top 50 people in eCommerce list, Tara McKeon, founder and CEO of Proud Poppy Clothing, and Matthew Horn, Group GM of Country Road Group. Together, they've each led standout results in one of the most competitive and fast-moving e-commerce markets we've ever seen. Thank you both for joining me on the couch today. So let's get started. Today's theme is winning in the fast lane, how Aussie businesses are thriving in a rapidly changing e-commerce market. So Tara and Matt, we all know the pace of change has been intense and the big international players are tough competition. So what impact is this having on your companies and how are you tackling it? And Matt, we might start with you.
Yeah, of course. I think in terms of how we think about it internally, you've got to start from a place of respect. I think these businesses have scaled for a reason. And you've got to admire the ruthless focus that they have on how they're going to win and the courage that they've had to reorganize their entire business around that, to really double down on that. And so, that can be really challenging and you can get lost in the advantages that they have. Sometimes they feel fair and unfair, whatever. But I think for me, it's more about what can we learn from these guys? Because I think if you look at a lot of them, there's a fairly repeatable playbook at the core of what they're doing, right? Like it's a really incredibly sharp customer value prop. It's growth driven by an incredible focus on performance marketing and then just a ruthless obsession with eliminating friction from the customer experience and UX. And so for us, it's how can we take some of those winning elements of their formula and repeat them in our own business, rather than just being dismissive or a little bit defensive about the threat they pose to our business.
I love that. Learn from them. So, yeah, love that. Tara, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Matt as well. There's definitely a lot that we can learn, but I also think there's a lot of things that we do in Australia really well, and it's just doubling down on that experience, giving that really beautiful personal experience, whether that be in store or online, showing up as founders and creatives, and just really strengthening that face to brand connection so that the consumers know who they are supporting. Aussies love to support Aussie businesses, so just really showing up and letting people know who they're supporting when they purchase from you, I think makes a world of difference.
Yeah, totally agree. On that note, that leads us nicely into the next question actually for you, Tara. Proud Poppy has built a beautiful community that is fiercely loyal and deeply engaged. I love what you do. So what have been some of the most powerful strategies that have helped you stay ahead of changing customer behaviour, and particularly on social?
I think my biggest strategy is that we don't really have a strategy. Everything that we do is led by authenticity and transparency. We really care about building genuine connections with our community. It comes from, we're a big business, but we've also got a big heart. So we've never lost that soul as we've grown. And that's really important. That's a non-negotiable for me. So if I find that we are getting too far ahead and we're running too fast, we're never afraid just to slow down and take a step back and just really reassess where we are and if we're losing any connection with our community, just trying to reestablish that again before we grow. We've definitely seen some challenges there where things happen so fast and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, hang on a minute, why are we doing this? So just coming back to your why and always keeping that, as your North Star, community as your North Star. But yeah, no real strategy, just really showing up authentically and just being ourselves, and people can relate to it. And I think people just love to see realness in a world full of filters.
Oh, couldn't agree more. Social's changed, and in a really good way.
Yeah.
So it's really great now.
We were almost one step ahead of the game without even knowing it. So we've never done filters or highly edited videos, and now okay, now we're great at this.
Everyone loves to see you just as you've just got out of bed. It's good. Thank you, Tara. Okay, Matt, Country Road's on a massively different scale, but evolving fast. So what CX design changes have driven the most impact for you recently, and what does that tell you about your customers' evolving evolving preferences?
I think maybe two things. I mean, I definitely big plus one to what Tara was saying about authenticity and how you can build that in Australia in response to some of these international pressures. Authenticity is the currency of trust, I think, in this kind of market. So we that definitely really resonates strongly in terms of where our focuses are. I think, more directly the answer to that question from my perspective is, we've been on a journey of some pretty significant digital transformation at CRG over the last couple of years, which has been fantastic. We have all the usual problems of a big legacy retailer with some terrible tech that we've sort of made some strategic decisions in sort of targeting. And that's been a privilege to have the resources to sort of execute on that. But for me, I think it's really actually, day to day, the challenge I set myself and increasingly the challenge I set my team is kind of similar challenges to Tara. I don't think scale actually matters to some degree, because I think there's something really powerful in the fact that, in the spirit of if you can't beat them, join them. A company as big, as complicated, as sophisticated as Amazon, just to name one of the big international challenges, if even they, at this point in their journey, at their revenue line, one of their core fundamentals as a strategic pillar is nailed basics, I think there's something really powerful in that. And I think, businesses at our scale often get lost in the complexity and, the cool stuff you can do, the new and shiny, but at the expense of some of what's really at the core of the business. And I think smaller businesses are really good at that, right? Because it's you live or die on that, quite literally. So for us, it's really about, that laser focus on how can we optimize our path to purchases as much as possible. So simplifying the mobile journeys, really thinking differently about our product description pages, and how can we elevate what the consumer really needs to support that purchasing decision and those kinds of things. And it's sort of, individually, none of this stuff is incredibly, sexy or glamorous work, particularly in this age of Gen AI. But it drives enormous results, particularly when you've got that scale. And so, for instance, one of the biggest changes we've made that has been hugely successful a little while ago is something as simple as, we're a product business. Are our product description pages actually heroing our product in the way we would love? Yeah. And when I looked at it, actually, a lot of the imagery was really compressed, even though we're sort of shooting it in really, really high res imagery in great studios. But the consumer if they can't touch and feel the product, how do you really hero the product in that kind of sense? Yeah. So I think it's sort of, really, really focusing on the fundamentals and the basics, nailing that. And I guess the big thing, particularly for us in our space as a series of brands, yes, our e-commerce presence has a role to play in terms of, the storytelling of provenance from a materials perspective, our sustainability story as well. But at the end of the day, an e-commerce site is there to help the customer part with their money, to be really blunt. So how do we just get out of the customer's way, give them what they need? And for those that are just intent on really just, closing that purchase and getting what they want, just helping them on that journey as well and making it as seamless as possible.
Love it. Nail the basics. I was at an expo on the weekend and a customer was looking at one of our products and they said, do I just get one milestone card with this? Because it looks like that on the website. And it's like, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm like, we've got to change that. You get a box of 25. Yeah. So we spent yesterday changing the descriptions.
It's also amazing how how desensitized we've come as of brand custodians or e-commerce players to actually all the little points of friction that we don't work. I mean, particularly in omnichannel, I don't think there's many people in market who've gotten click and collect right? It's still a pretty clunky experience, for instance. So what are we doing about that stuff? So,
love it. That's so important. Okay. Across both your businesses, how important is delivery experience in shaping customer loyalty, especially in a market where speed, and you mentioned Amazon before, and transparency are increasingly expected? So Tara, might go to you.
Yeah, for sure. So we've definitely seen unexpected delays recently, as I'm sure most businesses have in logistics and freight and everything that's been going on in the world. So once we do get our product and we are getting it out the door, it's really important that we can get that to the customer as quickly as possible. Often she's purchasing with an event in mind, so it's really important we get it there and in her hands to try and to feel amazing in. Always looking at ways to improve, but I think, being able to get that, we get so many people that are just really they're shocked almost that we really work so hard to get it out the door and that they get it so fast, and it definitely gives them trust to purchase with us again, especially if they have a certain event in mind that they need their product in time for.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, and Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, similar sort of views. I actually think it's
Yeah.
probably like one of the most underrated and under-discussed part of, or levers in the customer experience kind of matrix. I mean, it sounds sort of banal and obvious to say, but it's the customer's experience of your brand doesn't end when you take their money.
Yeah.
And how much time are we actually spending on that part of the journey? And admittedly, like we at CRG aren't doing the best job of that, but we want to make it a real focus. Because that moment, you know, once you have taken their money and the stuff is actually arriving, you know, that's when the promise and the magic that you sort of built all the way up into that stage, it either really comes to life and really gets tested in the real world. And if that experience falls over, even in small ways, like lack of clarity as to what's going on, the delays, your product arrives sort of crushed or broken or whatever it is, it can just so undermine your brand equity and your brand positioning.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to get right, but it's also something that I think there's a lot of value in putting more focus on. Because ultimately, I think, you know, there is very clear and established correlations between getting this right and driving higher repurchase rates and higher customer lifetime value. And I think that's where a lot of people perhaps miss the beat in this sort of piece. They're looking at it at a very transactional kind of level. How do I maximize the value that I can make out of every single transaction versus zooming out and taking a longer term view and going, okay, maybe I'm prepared to take a bit of a hit on the transaction here, but this is in service of driving higher customer lifetime value over the course of the year. So taking that kind of level. So that's something we're leaning into and wanting to work out how we can better master. Because ultimately, I think it's also the other thing I'd say is it's not just about speed. Ultimately, it's about control and convenience for the consumer. They just want the certainty and the ability to decide when they get it at a point in time that's good for them. So I think it's just a massive opportunity. So just really aiming at that.
And fuss-free returns. Make them fuss-free.
Oh, it's such a controversial topic of conversation at board level.
Whole different question,
level.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, very quick fire last question. Looking ahead, re-commerce, social commerce, cross-border trade, AI. Gosh, there's so much changing. Which e-commerce trend are you both most excited about? Tara, what's yours?
Getting back to basics. So I think we're both aligned there, just getting back to basics and really doubling down on what businesses do really well.
Brilliant.
Look, for me, I think it's the intersectionality of it all. I think if you look at two things like the rise of Gen AI and product discovery on the part of Australian consumers, 6 in 10 are apparently using it every single week. What does that mean for how they're first starting their path to purchase? The intersection of that and the rise of social commerce. I think the upshot there is, traditional funnels and traditional marketing funnels are really collapsing and forming in a very different way. How do you respond to that? And I think that's sort of both scary but an exciting challenge to face into because the landscape's just different.
100%. How do we leverage AI? How do we get everyone using it, right? And
do quite well. I only mentioned AI towards the very end. That's
I know. Got to get it in there, right? Okay. Tara and Matt, thank you both. Your insights have been a masterclass in how to stay competitive, nimble and customer first in a fast-moving e-commerce world.